Hey everybody, this is Mike, and today I'm doing a re-review. I've only done this once before with Too Many Bones of Middara, the JRPG campaign dungeon crawler. And disclaimer that they sent me a review copy of the 1.2 edition of the game. So as I said, Middara is a campaign dungeon crawler. You'll be using action points to move around on maps like these, made up of tiles, fighting varied enemies, controlling a team of 4 adventurers, generally with a mix of inventory and skills they've unlocked, while the monsters will activate in a card-based initiative system, following AI instructions that you know ahead of time based on how close or far the enemy characters are. And you can play the game in either a crawl mode, which is kind of a one-off little set of dungeons, or in the big campaign mode where you are going through just so much reading and narrative as you go through adventure after adventure. So let's discuss 5 key things about Middara with references back to my previous review. So my number 5 point in the old review was the exploration in the game, because there will be little tokens like objectives and totems that once you get eye contact to them or once you interact with them will have different things happen, having you read little secret entries to see what happens. And this is a cool system to keep the adventures exciting and have you discover new things. But the one big negative for the exploration is that the vast majority of these effects spawn monsters. That's what they'll be doing almost every time. And because monsters activate immediately after the person who spawned them, unless you play with a variant, you can get kind of mobbed by them. And that means that every time you try to explore one of those things, you're often sort of setting up your whole team like you're breaching and clearing a room. So it can get a little bit repetitive in that way, although still the exploration is fun and often exciting. My number 4 point in the old review was the action and stamina system, and I gave it a mix, and I'm going to raise that up to a pro. On each character's turn, they generally get 3 stamina points, although they can save some and build up to 5 in a round. And they can spend these to do attacks, to use special abilities or spells, and to move. And the big limitation that bothered me when I originally reviewed the game was that you can only move once per turn, and then you can spend extra action points, but like if you move and then attack somebody, you can't move again. But honestly, playing the game more, I really like this system because it does make you think about your movement more carefully and makes you really plan out how to spend each action point. Also, the fact that you can dodge and counterattack with action points means sometimes you want to end your turn with more or fewer based on where you are. And because the enemy AI is laid out for you and is so predictable, you really know like the best ranges to end your turn or not end your turn in. So I think upon further reflection, this action point system is actually really cool and gives you a lot of great choices on your turn. My number 3 point in my old review was the character growth and progression as you went through the campaign. I gave it a mix back then, and it's still a mix back now, but for slightly different reasons. So you're controlling up to 4 characters if you're playing solo. Each of them can have from like 7 to 10 items. They also build up more and more disciplines, skills as you go through the game. And my first complaint with this was that it can be overwhelming, and that is still the case. If you just have tons of items, each with you can see a lot of text and abilities, and this only gets more involved as you get further into the campaign, it can be a lot to manage. Although in both a positive and negative way, I'll note that for most of the items you get, when you level up to like the next tier of items, they basically have perfect analogs that have almost all the exact same skills with only minor differences, so it's not as overwhelming to level up through the campaign as I originally thought. And then another thing I complained about was that the leveling was potentially too open-ended because you could just like kind of splash into whatever disciplines you want, and I don't remember if this was in the original release. In the 1.2 rules, it's very expensive to get a lot of disciplines of the same level, which also means that it's tough to splash into multiple disciplines and multiple skill trees. So I found in my campaign that I would have like one character focusing on one color, another character focusing on another color, and that first of all made the characters feel more diverse, which I didn't think they did in the original review. I think they do feel very different based on which skills they get, and also made it a little bit easier to kind of pick which way I wanted to go with each character. So I really do like the skill system, but still the characters can get overwhelming as you get deeper into the game. My number 2 point in the old review was the combat system, and this was a full con. I gave this a con because it was very swingy, and I am going to raise it up to a mix. The swinginess is still there, but let's talk about it a bit more. So yeah, the swinginess first. You're rolling generally 2 dice for attacks, and you're adding up numbers and then also applying symbols, and it can be very math intensive. Not everyone's going to like that. And yes, a big thing, and this is true, it goes back to my original review, if you roll as a player a huge roll, you will destroy enemies, do like 12 damage instead of 1 or 0. And same thing if the enemies hit you, they will destroy you. So that is very swingy, but it can also be exciting. That's going to depend on your taste. But there are things like dodging and armors that let you cancel an entire attack and items that let you force an enemy to reroll and lots of things like that. So I think there are more mitigating factors than I gave credit for when I originally reviewed the game. And also, even though I already mentioned this, the enemy AI and the predictability of it really makes it so that you can set yourself up to take as few attacks as possible, or divide them up among your team so no one's getting slammed too hard. So I think there is a ton of smart, intelligent, tactical options in the combat in the game. And while, yes, the dice can mess you up, they can also be a really fun part of it. But to walk myself back toward that mix once more, the initiative system is very swingy because by the base rules, whenever you start a new round, you shuffle all the cards up. And the difference between all the enemies going first and potentially like spamming one character a whole bunch versus all of the players going first and killing, I don't know, half those enemies before they activate is pretty darn huge and can really swing the game either way. But I do want to give them credit. In the 1.2 rules, they have an optional rule where you just leave the initiative where it is round to round, so you don't get any big swings in luck based on one person going earlier or later. So you can change this, but yes, by the base rules, along with the dice, the actual initiative system itself can make the combat feel pretty swingy. Still going to be a mix overall for me. And finally, my number 1 point for the game was the story. And this was a big pro back then, and it's still a pro now. I think this is one of the finest stories I've seen in a game like this. The characters are exciting and interesting. You get into intrigue and surprises and mystery, but also just good old Dungeons & Dragons style adventuring and dungeon crawling. Now, a big thing I focused on in the original review was the characters themselves and that they are very clearly defined and like have dialogue and stuff instead of you creating your own characters. For me, that's great. I love that the characters are well defined, but people who want to kind of role play themselves are not going to like that as much. But a cool thing to mention that didn't exist when I originally covered the game is that while there is a ton of reading, and some players aren't going to want to read that much, later on they created, and this is on their website still for free, little TLDR summaries of each of the adventures. So if you just want to focus on the dungeon crawling and not read the story as much, you can read those as like a couple paragraphs instead of multiple pages and get through the narrative portion really quickly. So they've really accommodated multiple types of players, and I appreciate that. So overall, I've had a ton of fun replaying Middara. I would now put it in one of my top crawlers of all time, although it's going to depend a lot on your taste. If you don't want potentially swingy die rolls affecting your combat, if you don't want to deal with a ton of effects and text and parsing through enemy activations, all that might be really annoying. But for those who are tactically minded and want really interesting and engaging combat, while also wanting a deep and thoughtful and exciting story, I think, again, this is one of the best in the business to check out. So definitely a much more positive impression than I had when I played this 5 years ago. And if you want to see the game in action with the newest set of rules, check out my playthrough I posted recently of a Chapter 2 scenario. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.